Turns out he's a major cinephile.
They don't watch enough movies. It's a very simple formula.
And here we go. Well, loyal listener, it is the end of an era, but with so much on the horizon, fret not. We have come to the end of Phase 4 of the MCU, and there are some questions afoot. Something that has been the case since the end of Avengers Endgame, maybe that kind of post-credit end of the Spider-Man Far From Home. But this has been the longest phase of MCU things, technically, with 7 movies, 7 shows, and 2 seasonal specials that both turned out to be pretty good. That might be the future of Marvel projects on Disney+. I'm not counting What If. I just can't bring myself to do that or make that canon truly make sense. Overall, I'm not sure how much I really vibed with that show, and I think there was a tease of, oh, that's going to relate to Doctor Strange Multiverse Madness. It never did. So, even though I'll still check out season 2 of What If, just can't attach it to the rest of the stuff. So yeah, as far as the main non-holiday entries, this is the latest movie, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, to come out in the MCU timeline and our everyday linear, just like how normal time passes through. We have a bit of a break then until the much anticipated Phase 5 start film, being the third and potentially final Ant-Man movie, as well as getting a bigger introduction to the next big bad that can hopefully rival Thanos. Something that hasn't really been addressed at all outside of a small tease in Loki in the entirety of Phase 4 for the next big threat. Probably that is one of the biggest criticisms of this phase, that or the quantity over quality notion. Now, as a superhero lover, of all things, movies and shows, I thought this phase was fine. Some movies and shows were better than others, but it was all in all fine. Shang-Chi and the latest Spider-Man movie were particular standouts in the theater. But with the latest DC movie discussed on our last podcast episode, and the whole level of concern with what the heck they're doing with their movie slate now, we turned to how this MCU phase was closed out. The big question, how was Black Panther 2, just as a movie and as a whole, with how did it exist and address the real world death of previous leading man Chadwick Boseman. So if you're wondering if Chadwick Boseman is in this movie at all, not in the way that you would think, right? There's archival footage and there are murals and other references to him, and he does play a big part in the story without actually physically being in the movie. But his legacy is celebrated here in a tasteful and good way. Sadly, we could not get the return of Daniel Kaluuya. He's just far too busy, right? He's leading another Jordan Peele movie with Nope. While he could not return to his Black Panther role, and even though he's not in a Marvel Cinematic Universe production, he actually is in a Marvel thing. This time it'll be the sequel. We just saw a trailer drop for it, to the surprisingly good hit movie that doesn't have any MCU ties. It doesn't even try to. In the 2023 Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse movie. So excited to see one of those things that Sony has actually done a pretty good job with its remaining Marvel entities. So those people from the first movie, not back in this one. But there are a ton of both returners as well as a few new faces. Some spoilers ahead. So we'll give you the little pause for that. Be ready. So now you're warned, and we can continue ahead. If you pause and come back, welcome back. Winston Duke is back to bring some of the better comedy to this specific franchise. Martin Freeman is here too, albeit in a much smaller, less interesting, and less connected to more of the plot role. The main 4 women are back here too, including the new Black Panther, who we all kind of expected to get the mantle, in Letitia Wright. But more excitingly, Denai Guerrero, Walking Dead superstar, who is thankfully coming back and rejoining Andrew Lincoln for some form of conclusionary spin-off. Lupita Nyong'o had a bigger role, I think, in the last movie as well, but while she's a bit more sidelined here, Like, gosh, she is good whenever she's on camera. But if you want to look to the acting MVP of Black Panther Wakanda Forever, that person who really steals a show has to be Angela Bassett. She acted her ass off. And I hope she gets some form of recognition, not just in nominations for award season, but getting awards in, award season. Because she had some moments of pure acting brilliance and perfection. We gotta hype her up for what she brought to this movie. As far as the new or new-ish ads, I really am still trying to sort out what to think of Julia Louis-Dreyfus's role in these movies. It really hasn't been flushed out yet. We saw a tease after the fact in Black Widow because of the whole, release window mix-up because of something that happened in 2020. And that movie never really did a whole lot, especially because we saw a little more of her in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which still didn't give us a lot. 3 appearances in, we still really have no clue. We have a baseline, but I feel more confused about her overall goal now than I did before after this movie. We kind of probably are going to have to wait for that Thunderbolts movie to come out for some clear direction or answers, which apparently is going to have Harrison Ford, so that's something, right? I was pretty happy with Tenoch Huerta as a closer aligned version to a sympathetic enough villain who had a fleshed out enough backstory to be compelling and interesting, who also, I didn't know this, but I've been watching a couple Purge movies recently, just did Purge Anarchy. I feel like I hadn't seen that one on streaming services in ages, so did that a few days back. But this guy was actually the lead in the latest of those movies, A Forever Purge, which I don't think I would say any of the Purge movies outside of maybe like a few have like stalwart acting performances. They're fun. Like, they're not bad. They're just not good. But I enjoy the heck out of all those movies. The 2 seasons of the show are fine too. But I'll have to rewatch that to really look back at his performance in that. Never a bad time to rewatch 1 or all 5 of the Purge movies. And lastly, Dominique Thorne took on this new role of someone who had elements of both Iron Man and Shuri. She's fine in this movie. I don't know if this movie gave her enough to do, or they knew what to do with her overall. I don't know the future of Ironheart in the MCU. There's talk of a show. They're kind of maybe going away from shows, but there's talk about either Ironheart or Armor Wars, so it could be something in there. I'm curious, though. Sometimes she really did just feel like an object to a bunch of warring countries and factions, and how it all came to be never truly made sense to me. None of this is the actor's fault at all. I just hope she gets more of a chance to do her thing in a future movie or potential series that she could be headlining, that for me could potentially excitingly bring back dancing Sam Rockwell, who we haven't seen in ages. And man, Iron Man 2 may not be a good movie, but I do enjoy Sam Rockwell in it. Not that there's a whole lot of confidence in these shows existing, like I said, with rumors that after the success of specials like Werewolf by Night, and with there being potentially movies less in bulk and more focus on quality, these Disney Plus shows may be a thing of the past in Phase 5, or at least be starting to get phased out. Only time will tell, though. And in the Black Adam episode, we talked about one fun cameo that I wanted to kind of wait on, not jump in right away. This movie also had one of those. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to save that discussion a little bit later, because I think what a moment when you saw that. When you kind of go through the episodes and, kind of go through the movie as a whole, right? But what a moment. Thank goodness I didn't get spoiled for me. But last thing before we get to the plot, remember those early Iron Man movies that always had kind of fun cameos of people playing themselves, especially like news people? Well, I feel like it'd been a while at least since I'd seen one of those, and Anderson Cooper filled that role here in another franchise that, not all of them are going to dabble in like fictional geopolitical conflicts, but, this is one of those ones that it kind of makes sense, kind of like the Iron Man ones did earlier. You're not going to see that in Thor, right? But he's, the continuation of this thing of like real world news reporters commenting and saying that these are little things, but they're fun and kind of help make things feel real and kind of ingrains our fiction into small elements of reality kind of dosed in there. But to Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, to the movie at hand, the beginning really gets you right into some hardcore emotional things, right? We don't see T'Challa, but we see his sister trying hastily. She's kind of diving into her work to kind of come up with a cure to some mysterious deathly illness he has unsuccessfully. With the lack of the heart-shaped herb from the first movie, it all ties in nice for a way to both honor the character and have a way of telling the story, which is probably going to be everyone's concerns or questions. Is the toughest part of this movie, is how to do both things in a good but also somewhat delicate manner. The funeral procession and everything around that is just done well. You felt at times, and not in a bad way at all, like you were watching something that really did feel like it was taking you to a place of worship or a memorial of some kind. Even though it was a fictional moment for a fictional character, all of it just had that base of, reality and mourning, which made it much more, real. Now, initially, there were all these rumors of, maybe the military invading from the trailers, stealing Wakanda and vibranium was going to be like a journey led by an early introduction of Doctor Doom and his country. That was not the case. But I did like the follow-up of Wakanda revealing itself to the rest of the world at the end of the first movie to now everyone wants a piece of their resources and technology. It's a new arms race in a time of relative peace post the Thanos stuff. I mean, things are happening. Every movie there's crazy things happening, right? Like that big creature, it's not an Eternal, but one of those big alien gods just sticking out of the ocean, right? I mean, we've never really addressed that, which is another long-standing joke, especially with, we'll get into it, but tangents aplenty. People are gonna say Namor being not questioning why one of those things is sticking out of the ocean, and also the whole Thanos stuff that nothing really ever gets addressed. I get it. We might be tired of hearing about Thanos in Phase 4, the end of it, but that was a pretty big moment in the MCU, so it's tough to not think that leaves somewhat of a legacy and impact on things years and decades to come, because it did a lot more than the Age of Ultron did. That age, how brief was that age, am I right? But look, this arms race of everyone trying to get vibranium in the legal systems of government, that's not going to work. So instead, these people don't like that. They're not vibing with that, and they're going to try to take some themselves. And it's kind of happened in the first one too. It's always fun to see the cool ways Wakanda defends itself, and kind of how it's always kind of like a surprise. And this moment was no exception to being kind of cool and fun. And of course, this all just is more time for Angela Bassett to eat up her camera appearances, which she does. And quick back to Doctor Doom thing. Latest rumor is going to be in the Thunderbolts, so we'll see. That's the whole end of Phase 5, at least right now. I mean, obviously things can be so fluid at this point, but we'll see. That's the latest rumor of when we're finally going to see Victor Von Doom, and who knows? Question's always going to be, right, John Krasinski. Is it going to be Mr. Fantastic, or is it going to be someone else? So, TBD. Now you all know, I love me some spooky things. And while the MCU has had little of this so far, Werewolf by Night was a very pleasant surprise. But the moment of having, like, the CIA ship is in the ocean and it starts to get kind of hunted down with tailing us into the introduction of Atlantis was the closest thing that the MCU franchise as a whole has gone into horror in a big screen way, outside of elements of Multiverse of Madness, of course. I'd say that had more slasher vibes, right? Getting hunted down by one entity, like a Jason or a Michael or whoever, where this kind of felt like a whole group of people, more like maybe a vampire or a zombie movie. I've kind of dabbled in both recently, so it's kind of fun to think of, these brief things of Marvel and horror elements, horror adjacent things. Both very fun. But I really can't wait for the full horror movie with Blade eventually on the horizon, when all that gets sorted out on with who's directing and writing, and we're assuming at least the lead man is still there. who knows? It feels like Blade is one of the ones that I get nervous and I'm just never going to see it. But this scene, like the Multiverse of Madness scene where Wanda was kind of hunting people down through mirrors and such, very fun just to get a little scare mixed in with my superhero stuff, because rarely do those things blend together. I think there's a few movies out there, but I think, was it Brightburn? Is that still out there? I still haven't seen that, but there's a couple, the Blades early on, the Blade TV show, of course, but there's not a lot of it out there yet. And while the jury's still not out on seeing how Namor will fare in the rankings in MCU villain history, something that at times people are a little iffy on. They don't always love the MCU villains, be they acting or how quickly they're killed off, or just they just are there. But you can't mistake the balance of menace he has with his threats, and also kind of blending in. He's not just some evil for the sake of evil, although I think that's why Willem Dafoe was so good coming back to a Spider-Man role to mix it up. But it was nice seeing some sympathy, with this guy. He's got to look out for his people, and they have their own thing in world going. Everything in their ocean world feels a little less glamorous compared to the DC Atlantis, and it all feels a little more refugee-like, even years later, which is kind of how it all started, with how they did their history from the start of Atlantis. Always the tough thing, bringing in history and groups of characters who've been around for a while, but we're just not seeing them until so much later. And this history of the MCU has kind of been built out for a while, so always tweaks to seeing how it changes and always a little risky. I can't wait to see, be it good or bad. I'm hopeful, obviously. You gotta be hopeful for these, of how they're gonna bring the X-Men in, be they the new ones or some versions of one of the older ones. Speaking of X-Men, once again, there are for sure Magneto vibes. It doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel as good as it did, but beside that comparison, we once again hear the term mutant being name dropped a lot more into Phase 4, and no exception here in Black Panther Wakanda Forever. We know that is another tease, though, to the whole inclusion of their species into the larger MCU. And I don't think this is going to be like Inhumans, where that just didn't amount to anything with that very strange TV show. As much as we love Anson Mount, that whole Inhumans thing just didn't work out. And before we get into more movie stuff, the last movies, of course, was good, right? The first Black Panther, it was, and still is, one of my favorite MCU movies. You can, of course, check my previous episode rankings, all of that. I mean, there's stuff on Instagram, Twitter list, and of course, Letterboxd for my to-date rankings for all these movies and such. The list is massive now, and there continues to be minor tweaks to it as we go. But one of the best things of Black Panther, the first one, was not just the acting or the action, but the music. The soundtrack by Mandalorian composer Ludwig Göransson, and of course Kendrick Lamar. And while Göransson is back for the sequel, the less orchestral soundtrack this time around is not a majority of one artist. There's no Kendrick to be seen, but Rihanna, singing legend in one of the first albums I ever bought, Music of the Sun, lends her talents to a few particular memorable tracks, especially Lift Me Up, one of those special memorial-like songs. But it goes without saying, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, regardless of whatever else you want to say for it, I think is pretty good. They got some good tracks on there. But music discussion over for now, and back to the plot stuff. The movie takes a bit of a weird turn here with the kind of search for this person who I feel like there are some questions. A vibranium locating device feels super specific, and part of me wonders how anyone outside of Wakanda can discover it, especially a kid. But I'll roll with it, even if I don't agree or vibe with it. I don't believe it. This part of the movie all has a bit of weird balance of that kind of trademark MCU humor. Something I kind of take or leave. Darkness in my soul, Nick. I like jokes here and there, But sometimes, as much as I love superhero content, the jokes are a bit much. And that is certainly the case at times in this movie. I mean, look, even in the first movie, the what are those sandal joke, right? Aha, but also, The CIA storyline overall is kind of blah, with us just waiting for kind of more Thunderbolts content that we don't get. Ross is pretty much the mole and eventually just gets arrested for being made to do that. That is like his whole thing. And eventually we'll see more from Julia Louis-Dreyfus, just not in this movie, obviously. And while some of the movie halts here, seeing the MIT breakout from the government, as well as seeing this latest version of an Iron Man suit, is kind of a cool deep build dive from the early MCU days. That is more believable that some smart kid could end up working their way on making a personal version of the Iron Man suit a lot more than the vibranium detector. It may be a bit rough around the edges, but it works, and that harkens back to that thought of just how far people were back to making an Iron Man suit. Like in Iron Man 2, that was the whole discussion of how long it would take to make someone. And, look, I think some of the Spider-Man stuff, right? Same thing. It's a kid who kind of comes up with something. It's not, like unbelievable, but, if you suspend your disbelief, it kind of works here. But still never got that vibranium thing. And obviously, right, the power dynamics for vibranium, it's one of the strongest things in the MCU. By phase 4 of this, universe, I think the Iron Man suit is not the strongest thing out there, and I feel like more people are kind of aware of this stuff, so it makes more sense that someone would try to make one of those over something that I'm shocked that anyone even knows about how to do it. Now, as a big Walking Dead fan, I know it's not a perfect show, and a lot of people have moved away from it, especially after the Glenn stuff. But I love the original, and I'm pretty chill with the main spinoff Fear as well. So seeing Danai Gurira in this franchise and the MCU as a whole has been fun, especially with what she's done with her appearances. Kind of wish she had been in the Dora Milaje group in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but I'm sure she was doing other acting things too. So even though Shuri and Riri Williams, aka Ironheart, both get taken by the Atlantis group after a pretty fun fight that shows just how strong the Atlanteans are as a whole, but her being dismissed by the Queen, that's crazy, and it doesn't make any sense. Also, while it's crazy to me, that does give us more and more M'Baku scenes, and yes, of all his stuff, that's MCU humor I can get behind. That's kind of right there for me. I mean, his can be a little groany too, but I think humor-wise that makes sense, and I get that a little more. It takes ages, right, for Lupita Nyong'o to come back into the fold. There was always a chance she could become the new Black Panther, even slimmer odds for Guerrera, but we always knew deep down that Wright would be the one to be the Black Panther eventually. Heck, that was her whole arc this movie. But while she eventually becomes a Black Panther, she first kind of has a whole semi-captive tour of Atlantis. And it's cool to see the parallel viewpoints and another world hidden from the known world and just their culture. It did eventually, obviously, become a bit of a cultural war, but before that, incredible failure to communicate where this could have kind of been all avoided. That and some just bad timing. Look, they're not going to send the child prodigy to get killed off by ocean people, but that will always be the greater good question. This ain't Game of Thrones, though, so no obvious child murders here. Also, isn't it crazy how many water-type movies are all coming out now? This, new Avatar, the eventual Aquaman sequel. That could be the end of it also, unfortunately. So many water movies to compare and contrast, see how they decided to do water effects. And you can, make your own opinions about who you thought was best. So seeing Nyong'o do her cool spy stuff, something we only briefly get to see in the beginning of the first movie, and only once here. Her spy skills are cool to be on display. And, she even does some assassin stuff unintentionally. And setting off to this whole crazy series of events. And this whole chain of events just kind of continues to change and evolve. And I feel like the most impact happens at times in how Wakanda is dealt with. I guess you could say the same about Asgard, but I don't know if we ever cared about as much Asgard as we did about Wakanda. Sorry. Like, look, Wakanda has lost many rulers this time over. And I think the trailers made us think maybe Shuri was going to be taken out by having the Queen say, I've lost everyone. But there also was a scene where kind of there's a little glass window between Namor and Angela Bassett. Maybe we should have been more worried about that one, because the latter was the one that gave us the trouble, right? The King of Atlantis went wild with his mini invasion assassination attempt, taking out the Queen. Not just of Wakanda, but the Queen of acting in this movie. She ate in this, and this is also giving us some stakes and menace for a character that went from opposing viewpoints in a country to now it's a war. And like, once we kind of got to that stuff, like the actions and fights in this were very good. There's something neat about, even though the diplomatic trip did not work because of bad timing and multiple murders, just people not talking to each other also. Communicate, people. Like on dating apps. Be a good communicator. Gosh, dating apps. Anyway, but having Shuri get part of an herb from Atlantis that makes them strong. So now she can be the Black Panther, the true protector of Wakanda. This, of course, led to the best cameo that thankfully was not spoiled for me. So I hope you know this already. I gave you a spoiler warning earlier, so this is another small spoiler warning, but you know, at this point, So when going to the ancestral plane, which always looks great, we could have seen so many people for Shuri to meet. Could have been her dad, played by John Candy, who T'Challa saw when he went, right? His Black Panther. It could have been her mom. Something that could have mirrored how T'Challa saw the parent he bonded with, too. Now, we knew who we were not going to see with director Ryan Coogler making it known that they weren't going to try and digitally recreate Chadwick Boseman, something that people have dabbled with either de-aging or bringing people back entirely like some of the Star Wars is. So, the surprise had to be that when we saw Michael B. Jordan revealed to her in the Ancestral Plane, I mean, who saw that coming? There are rumors of bringing him back from the dead to be the new Black Panther, but instead this interaction started her on her understandable enough revenge path, and he was a pretty understandable villain, all things considered. I know they have to make someone do like war crime type things to make them a villain if they're too likable, but whatever. And look, the path that this was set on had some crazy action set pieces that we were excited to see. You got multiple Iron Man type suits flying around. You got a new Black Panther, Shuri under the helm this time, and a big ass fight on a boat in an ocean. And you would have thought maybe that would have been a poor idea. I mean, they're trying to lure these water people out, but still, interesting choice. But no matter what, the action scene is crazy fun. It always helps to not just have everyone take on some big monster. A few times it's going well, but so many times just a big CGI monster just doesn't work. But this whole mini war was just fun to see. And with that going on, seeing Shuri almost straight up murder Namor, it's weird that she comes back from it all to befriend him and have a truce after he killed her mom. But, I guess you say, I'd be the queen of, the nations and diplomatic whatever. It just all felt a bit quickly wrapped up, and it didn't feel truly believable. I mean, you can't make one of your new heroes a, murderous villain type, but it's the end that, we got, not the end I feel like we wanted, and, there was cool fight stuff leading up to it, but the fact that it just kind of casually ended, I never really got that part. And the end tries to fly through things, right? Saving Martin Freeman from jail, planting more heart-shaped herbs, and all the political royal family ruler could be her and Baku, where is everyone going, Black Panther stuff. Then it teases why Namor can't really be trusted. Not sure that's a huge surprise, but once again, it is what it is. And of course, the mid-credit scene has us introduced to another character, that's kind of been the trend of late. I don't think it was as weird this time as some of the other ones are just dropping off a random character here and there. But this had, why we had to see Lupita Nyong'o, because she's raising a son, and it's the son of T'Challa, which was a, nice, emotional kind of catharsis thing again. Let's, not think of a Game of Thrones and say it's not going to assumedly lead to a crazy royalty issue of lineage down the line and who gets the crown. But, the end wrapped up a lot of stuff really quick, and maybe not in the most satisfying way, but there's a lot good here, which takes us right to our letterbox rating for this latest MCU movie before we set our sights on Phase 5. And I've toiled and toiled with the thought. I think you could go Black Panther Wakanda Forever could be either 4 stars or 3.5 stars, all out of 5. I don't think you're wrong either way. I liked a lot of Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I really did. The emotional stuff was good. I thought the villain was nuanced. And a lot of times, if you've been paying attention to my full rankings of these MCU movies, the acting and story is all important, but having a villain that's not so one-dimensional is a lot of times a big up. And I think this does that. So I think with that in mind, we'll put it at 4 stars out of 5. And the list is always fluid, but for now, let's leave it at 4 because I think villain-wise it was good. Some of the jokes are kind of whatever, and the last third and some of even the armor stuff kind of sped through. So, oh man, it's so close to being a 3.5 for me. So that is Black Panther Wakanda Forever. It's a fine addition to the MCU that I think not only did the job of the movie, it had to, but also it found a way to memorialize Chadwick Boseman. Not just, the plot, but it helped with real-world things too. It was good overall, not perfect, but it was absolutely one of the better, more complete Phase 4 MCU movies out there. And now it's done, so now we'll see what Phase 5 brings. We maybe never got a true direction for the MCU as a whole after this phase, and just a small sprinkling of Kang. But I hope people see this movie, not just overall, but especially for the amazing performance of Angela Bassett. But what did you think of not only this MCU movie, but the entire Phase 4? Shows, specials, movies alike. Let us know on all of our social media platforms. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, of course, at either knickknack_IC or knickknackmovies. Well, that's all for me. So cheers, and as always, until next time, cinephiles.
Are you not entertained?
I think this is going to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I don't like goodbyes. Let's just call this see you later, alligator.